Awesome. Are we ready to get into the Word tonight? This is good. Just real quick before we do that, two quick announcements for you this evening that I want to drive home. The first is Vision Night. I really want to encourage us as a church to be there on Thursday. It is an incredible opportunity to lean in and say, I want to move from being a consumer to being a contributor at church. So if you've been coming to church regularly for a while, or maybe you're brand new, but you want to contribute, you want to be a part of things, you got to get yourself to Vision Night. Just straight up that simple. That's where you got to be. I don't know what you're doing on Thursday, but cancel it. Be at Vision Night. You'll be better for it. Does that sound good? Okay, like half of you are like, I'm still not sure if this applies to me. Let me make it clear. If you have a pulse, you need to be at Vision Night. It will be worthwhile, I'll promise. What are we doing? We're going to be talking some strategy. We're going to be talking some vision. I don't know who just busted up about open a Coke, but man, that energy drink, man. Lift Church, sponsored by Monster Energy. But I'm just like, man, I could go for one of those. Anyway, be at Vision Night. It's going to be legit. Second announcement for you really quick is that November 5th, what's happening that week? It's a Sunday. What would be happening that week? Gala, good job. You all get A+. November 5th, that Sunday, we're going to be doing service upstairs in CIBC Hall. So we're not going to be in here that night. We're going to be instead upstairs on the third floor. We'll be doing dinner in here at 7 p.m., but service will be at 5:30 and 7:30 upstairs, third floor, CIBC Hall. It's going to be really great. Just moving location for the night. Does that sound good? So make sure you're there that week. It'll be a week not to miss, I can promise you. All right, let's get into the Word tonight. Who's ready? That's fewer of you than a minute ago. I'm concerned. What changed? Who's ready to get into the Word? All right, that's good. You know, sometimes I just think we got to get excited about getting into the Word. I believe, in fact, I don't believe, the Word says of itself that it is as sharp as a two-edged sword, dividing bone from marrow. In other words, it cuts in and is going to speak to us this evening. We're going to be opening up 1 Peter. We're going to be in 1 Peter for the next couple of weeks. Last week, I was talking about this idea that we need to prepare in our faith. Rather than just reacting and kind of just having stuff happen to us, we need to be a people of preparation if we want to be radical followers of Jesus. I want to finish that sermon. I only preached the first half of it last week, and tonight I want to unpack sort of the second piece of it. There's two key commands. The first command is prepare your minds for action, and then the second command is don't slip back. And I want to unpack that second piece for us tonight. A little bit of context about what's going on in 1 Peter. 1 Peter is an incredible book. It is a letter from one of Jesus' closest friends to the church. Now, the church at this time was suffering. They were struggling. They didn't know how to express their faith in a world that hated them. And so 1 Peter is a letter from this precious follower of Jesus to saying, hey, church, this is what it looks like to live your faith in a world that hates your faith. And it's profound and it's incredible. And so we're going to pick it up tonight in verse 14. I'm not going to read the whole thing just in the interest of time. I'm just going to read the first 3 verses and we'll get to the rest a little bit later. It says this, so you must live, verse 14, you must live as God's obedient children. Don't, everybody say don't. Slip back into your old ways of living to satisfy your own desires. You didn't know any better then. But now you must, everybody say must, be holy in everything you do, just as God who chose you is holy. For the scriptures say, you must be holy because I am holy. Let's pray. Lord, I pray that my words would not resonate tonight, but that your Spirit would speak from the scriptures. God, that you would transform hearts, that you would transform thinking. Jesus, that you would do something incredible in this space, in these 45 minutes we have together. God, that you would challenge our thinking, that we would leave more in love with you. Father, I pray for those that have no idea who you are, that are just coming to church to check things out. Lord, I pray that you would help them to understand what we're talking about tonight. Amen. So some of you, I want to ask you a question. Is there anyone in this room who feels in your faith like you're sometimes torn between two kingdoms? Like you've got this desire to be a follower of Jesus, and you wake up some mornings, you leave church Sunday night, and you're like, man, I'm going to change the world. It's going to be incredible. It's going to be fantastic. I'm going to follow Jesus. Jesus, wherever you go, I'm going to go. I'm going to go there. And then you wake up Monday morning, and you're like, I didn't mean it. Nobody's going to put up their hand for that one? There are those of you who feel like stretched and torn between two kingdoms. On one hand, you long to follow Jesus. You long to be a Jesus follower. And on the other hand, you feel this constant tension and warring within you. Things where you're saying, I'm not sure how to live that out. I'm not sure if I can do that. I'm not sure if I can walk this out, Jesus. Maybe there's some of you that you're just like brand new baby Christians. I love baby Christians. You guys are the best. You just like chase Jesus. You're like, whoa, I'm all in. I have no idea where I'm going. But we're going. But you maybe find yourself taking 2 steps forward and then 1 step back. And then 1 step forward and like 9 steps back. You're like, I'm worse than where I started. What's going on here? You see, we go through this process of sort of back and forth in our faith. This tension within us, where we long to be sort of radical Jesus followers. I've been reading about Dietrich Bonhoeffer lately. Dude was radical. Died for his faith in 1945. I should go read his story. It's crazy. And I read it, and I'm like, I want to be like that. And then I wake up some morning and I'm like, I don't know if I can do it. You see, we have this push and this pull, this forward and this backward. And what Peter wants to do as he speaks to us this evening is he wants to challenge you. He wants to challenge you right where you are to say, hey, I want to call you to a lifelong, radical pursuit of Jesus. So that we don't just come to church going, I'm gonna follow Jesus, I'm gonna change my life, I'm gonna get right with God, I'm gonna do good things, and then go on Monday morning, wake up, and have nothing to show for it. How do we get beyond that? How do we move beyond just being cultural Christians or being good religious people, but being people that have discovered the source of life? What does that look like? And so Peter just comes out swinging, just like right hook to the face tonight. Here we go. You guys ready? Verse 14. So you must, everybody say must. You must live as God's obedient children. You must live as God's obedient children. So before he gets to the don't slip, you know what? The first thing he says is prepare your minds for action and exercise self-control. But then he starts to get to the heart of what it means to be a Jesus follower, which he says, I want you to be obedient. Now, we don't like the word obedience, do we? We read it and we're like, oh, that's awkward. That is not a word I like. Some of you are going, I want to follow Jesus, and you're waiting for God to speak to you, and you're not sure what his voice is saying. You're going, God, I want to be radical for you, but I'm not sure how to discern your voice. It's interesting. This question of obedience is, I think, a fundamental question of our faith. Let me illustrate how. One of the most common questions I get asked as a pastor is, how do I hear God's voice? How do I hear God's voice? Some of you that come to me going, I'm not sure what God is saying to me. How do I hear what God is saying? I want to ask you a question. Do you really want to know the answer? Are you actually interested in what God would have to say? Maybe you're a skeptic here tonight. Do you think all of this religious stuff is crazy? But I want to ask you a question. Have you ever actually prayed and said, God, I want you to speak to me? And would you be open to the possibility that he might? And so you see, Peter starts to speak to this. He says, if we want to sustain our faith, we need to live as a people that are obedient. Obedient. What does obedience mean? It means following the instructions of Jesus. Doing what he says. Now, I want to just point something out that's just crazy beautiful here. You see, when I say obedience, many of you are going to behavior. Am I behaving right? Am I being a good Christian? Am I checking the check boxes? Am I living according to what the pastor is saying I should live? That's not what Peter's calling us to. Obedience when we talk about it as Jesus followers, is not living according to a standard of excellence in your behavior. He doesn't say, be obedient to the instructions I have given you. He says, be obedient as children. You see, our obedience to Christ has everything to do with our relationship with Christ. If we want to live obediently to the call of God on our life, we need to learn to walk in relationship with God in our life. In John 10, Jesus says this. He says, my sheep know my voice. I know them and they follow me. You see, many of you ask the question, how do I hear God's voice? And I want to challenge you to say, I'm not sure you're interested in hearing God's voice. You see, obedience is not a matter of just following the instructions of God. It has everything to do with stepping into relationship with God. Entering into a deep, profound, lifelong journey of saying, God, you now direct my life. And the reason we don't know his voice, the reason we don't walk in obedience is because we're not actually willing to do what he calls us to do. We're not actually willing to step into the things that he has called us to step into. Ultimately, what we want to do is we want to say, God, here's the deal. Here's the deal. I want to know your voice. I want to walk in obedience to you, but here's how this is going to work. Let me tell you how it's going to work, God. You tell me, you speak to me, and then I'm going to decide if I like it. And if I like it, I'll say it's your voice. And if I don't like it, I'll say it's just my own crazy thoughts. Right? We do this all the time. We hear God speaking, but because we're afraid of what he's saying, we don't allow it to actually carry any weight in our world. Now, here's the thing about Jesus' voice. Jesus' voice has already spoken in the scriptures. You see, many of us are going, God, speak to me. I'm willing to be obedient. When was the last time you actually opened the scriptures and said, God, speak to me? You see, we want to walk consistently in our faith, but if we're not willing to actually create room to allow God to speak from his scriptures, we're probably not going to hear a whole lot of what he has to say. See, we want the moment with God. The light shining, the angels. And some of you are going, you're waiting for the moment, but meanwhile, God has spoken from his scriptures to you profoundly today. Do you know Jesus' voice? Let me give you an example. Some of you are in relationships, and you're going, I'm trying to decide, like, God, like, do I move in or do I not move in with my girlfriend? Do I move in or do I not move in? God, speak to me. God, speak to me. And, of course, God's probably not saying a whole lot. And you're like, cool, all right, I'm just going to move in with my girlfriend because God's not saying anything. Have you actually taken the time to study what the scriptures teach about relationships and shape the way you're living out of relationship with Jesus speaking there to you? And you go, well God, Pastor, there's nothing in the scriptures that talk about moving in with your girlfriend. I'm like, well, of course not. It was the first century. They didn't have girlfriends and boyfriends in the first century. This is a crazy modern construct. There's something wrong with us. We like torturing ourselves. Some of you are like, amen, brother. But you see, what we do see in the scriptures is something radically different than what we see in our culture. See, what we see in our culture is here. What you should do is you should move in for economic reasons, and you should just test the relationship. See if it's going to work out for you. You know what I mean? Like, let's try it. Let's test it. Try before you buy. It's wise, right? But what the scriptures teach is a whole different kind of relationship. See, that's a contract-based relationship. But what the scriptures teach is they teach a covenant-based relationship, where instead we step in and we say, I am in no matter the price, no matter the cost, no matter the future, I am with you until I die. That's the picture the scriptures teach. And we go, well, they don't say anything about moving in with my girlfriend. No, because it paints a higher picture. And we're going, God, speak to me. God, speak to me. Give me direction for my relationship. He is speaking. We're just not listening. My sheep listen to my voice, and the primary avenue for Jesus' voice is his words in Scripture. Do you know them? Do we know Jesus? And so this brings me to the next section that Peter lands on. So he says, live obediently as children. Live obediently as God's children. And then he says this, don't. Everybody say don't. Don't slip back into your old ways of living to satisfy your desires. If our first piece is that we don't want to hear the voice of God, the second piece is that we have a habit of taking a step forward for God, living boldly, making bold promises, and then slowly sliding back. We slide back. We take a bold step forward, and then we slide back. And Peter recognizes that there's this process of sliding in our faith. And there's two dimensions to it that I want to unpack tonight. Two dimensions that I think frame why this happens. The first is compromise. The first dimension that causes us to slide in our faith is that of compromise. I think many of us are looking at like the big things, right? You're looking like, have I murdered anyone? Check. Okay, good. I'm not murdering anyone. I'm probably doing okay in my faith. I'm not, completely addicted to pornography, so I'm probably doing okay. But you see, what Jesus does is he comes in and he says, actually, the starting point of these big picture things is the little things. He says, if you even lust after someone, you need to gouge your eyes out. If your hand is tempting you to steal, cut your arm off. You see, what he's saying is, if we compromise on these little things, it will lead to much bigger things. The reason we slide in our faith isn't because we're probably walking into the major, quote, sins. It's because we're living a life of compromise. It's because we're living a life of compromise. And the reality is that if your faith is characterized by compromise, it will never, ever be radical. No one's going to look at your faith and be like, wow, they are 50% in on Jesus. I should probably follow Jesus too. 50%. The reality is that an invitation to following Jesus is an all or nothing proposition. It is an all or nothing proposition. And that's why it's so intense. And yet we want to compromise. We want to compromise. So how do you detect compromise in your life? How do you know if you're living a life of compromise? Simple. That which you have to justify, you are compromising. That which you have to justify will never, ever satisfy. For example, if you find yourself saying, but it was just so funny, man. Like I know the humor's kind of joke, but if I just slip the F-bomb in, it's just so much better. Hashtag compromise. You see, what we say is but I like it. But I'm not hurting anyone. But it's so much funnier. But it's not really a big deal. And what we do in those moments is we slide. We're compromising. We're opening our hearts up. Just a little crack. And in that crack, a wedge is inserted. And we start to slide. Our hearts start to be split in two. And all of a sudden, we start being torn between two kingdoms. If you have to justify something, that thing is never going to satisfy you. You see, when we compromise, we are opening up our hearts to that wedge. And compromise is a process of feeding it and driving it. That which you feed is going to grow. Well, there was only 2 drinks, not 3. Yeah, but they were like each 45 ounces. Yeah, but I was with my bros and we know each other and this is what we do every New Year. If your faith is characterized by yeah, but more than it is characterized by yes, Lord, you're going to find yourself in a position of slipping. Our response is yes, Lord, not yeah, but. The second piece is this. If the first cause of this is compromise, the second cause is comparison. Comparison. Don't slip back into your old ways of living. So what we do is we make a bold, maybe you're a brand new Christian, you're like, I made a bold step for Jesus. Awesome. Stoked on that. Going to live bold for Jesus. And all of a sudden you start looking at your old life. You're like, it looks pretty good. I seemed to be doing better then. I had more friends. I was more popular. I was doing pretty cool. It was pretty easy. I didn't have to, give any of my time or my resource away. I got to do whatever I want on Sundays. I didn't have to serve. I didn't have a pastor yelling at me every Sunday. You can find another church if that's the problem. That's a joke. And, we slide. We slip back because what we're doing is we're looking at the life God has called us to and the life we used to have. And the life we used to have is looking a whole lot easier. The reality is that the call to following Jesus is not an easy call. It is a sacrificial call. Trust me, there's temptation in me to preach simple, nice messages where I just give you life advice. Tell you how to solve your relationship issues or whatever. But at the end of the day, that's not what I see in Scripture. What I see in Scripture is a call to sacrifice, not a call to comparison. And so what we do is we look at what the world's doing. We look at what's happening in our culture. So let's pick up the living with your girlfriend thing again. And we say, check it. It's easier. You save money. You get to try it before you buy it. You get to kind of figure things out. It's not so bad. Come on, what's really the problem? It looks like it answers all the questions. And so we compare that, which looks very easy, to what God is calling us to, which is a covenant, lifelong commitment that stands the test of time. And that looks hard. And so we compare. But the problem is we're comparing the values of heaven to the values of this world. We are not comparing apples with apples. We are comparing that of infinite worth to that which is temporal and quick. And so the temporary quick thing is always going to win if we choose to let it. And another little example, I'm really excited to see what this does in July of next year when weed is legalized. I came into church tonight and there was a magazine. It said, marijuana, let's have a discussion or something like that. I was like, oh boy, let's have a discussion about weed. And some people are going, well, I don't smoke weed now because it's illegal, but in a year it's going to be legal, so it'll be all right, right? No big deal, come on, a little joint, not going to hurt anyone. First of all, if you hear yourself saying it's not going to hurt anyone, it's probably going to hurt someone. Number one, and number two, compromise. But what we do is we start to frame our decision-making based on the patterns of this world. We compare what the world is doing to what God is calling us to. God calls us to be sober-minded, to put our identity and our hope in Him. The world's saying, well, it's totally fine. We compare. We go, I'll take the world's way. And what Jesus and what Peter is saying to us tonight is don't slip, don't compromise, don't compare. But it actually gets to something deeper. He says, don't slip back into your old way of living. You didn't know any better then. But don't slip back into your old way of living that did what? You lived to satisfy your desires. Now, when I write a sermon, I start by writing down a set of questions. It's sort of my starting point. I start with my text on one hand, and then I start with a bunch of questions on the other hand. And I just write down question after question after question. Questions I think you're asking, questions I'm asking, questions I think that need to be answered even if we're not asking them. But in this case, I only had one question for this sermon. One question I wanted to answer with this message. How do we live radically for Jesus? How do we live radically for Jesus? And you know what my deepest concern is? That you're not asking that question. You see, we live to satisfy our desires. And what Peter says here is stop. Start to live to satisfy the desires of Jesus. Let me give you a whole new suite of longings and passions and desires in your world. And so the question is how? What does that look like? Almost as if to answer the question, Peter lands us in verse 15. And he says this, but now you must be holy in everything you do, just as God who chose you is holy. For the scriptures say, you must be holy because I am holy. Now, let's be honest. Can we just have straight talk as a church for a moment? Most of us have absolutely no clue what holiness is about. And some of you, when you go, you've been around church for a little while, you go, I know what holiness is. It means to be set apart. True story. I just don't know what that means. Holiness is one of these words that's only found in the Bible, and we sometimes translate it as set apart, but we don't really have a clue what that means. We really have a poor understanding of holiness. Let me give a little bit of context for what's going on in this passage. This is a quote out of Leviticus chapter 19, among two others. There's three places in the scriptures where it says, "You must be holy because I am holy." And in these three places, God is speaking to a people. Now, this people are the Israelites. So let's back up a little bit. The Israelites were a people that God had created out of a guy named Abraham. Nation he formed from Abraham. They had fallen into slavery. They had spent 400 years as slaves. We're going to get back to that in a minute. And they were called out of slavery, and they were wandering the wilderness. And as they're wandering the wilderness, God starts to give them some instructions, because what he has to work with is a bunch of slaves that are now free. The problem was that they had no identity. They didn't know who they were. They didn't know what it meant to be a nation and a people. And so God's trying to take this confused set of ex-slaves wandering the desert, and he's trying to make a nation out of them. And so what he does is he gives them this law, these instructions that help frame and define the parameters on a nation called the nation of Israel. And at the center of all of those parameters is this instruction: you must be holy because I am holy. Now, I want to point something very important out to you, a little Bible study. It says you must be. You must be. Everybody say be. You must be holy. He doesn't say, "Hey, nation of Israel, I've given you some instructions. Make sure you do holy things because that's what I've told you to do." That's not what he does. He says, "I want you to be holy." In other words, I want you to assume an identity of holiness. Check it. Holiness is not about behavior, it's about identity. Holiness, when Peter instructs us to live holy, he's not saying, "Hey, stop sleeping with your girlfriend." He's not saying, "Hey, stop smoking weed," which I was just talking about. He's not saying, "Hey, stop." He's not trying to correct your behavior. What he's trying to do is correct your identity. And what many of us do in our faith is we go through trying to conform our behavior to Jesus without dealing with our identity at all. And so what Peter does, he says, "I'm calling you to be holy." In this context, holiness is about being set apart from finding satisfaction in the world and instead being a people who are entirely satisfied and consumed by the things of God. Having an identity as a pursuer of the things of God. You see, holiness is not about stopping or correcting your behavior. It's about assuming an identity, a position of radically pursuing God. And so the question is, well, what does that look like? How does that manifest itself? How do I actually make a decision based on that? And this is where we get to verse 18. Man, there's some Bible study happening tonight. This is going to be awesome. Verse 18, check it out. It's going to be on the screens in a second. "For you know that God paid a ransom to save you from the empty life you inherited from your ancestors. And it was not paid with mere gold or silver, which lose their value. It was the precious blood of Christ, the sinless, spotless Lamb of God." All right, who's confused? We were talking about being holy, and now we got like lambs. Anyone a lamb fan in the house? I'm South African. We eat a lot of lamb. It's the best meat. It's kind of gamey. It's a little sinewy. It's really fatty. Oh, nothing like lamb at Easter. So all of a sudden, Peter starts talking about lamb. And he says, "For God paid a ransom to save you from this empty life you inherited from your ancestors." He's just quoted Leviticus, reminding them that there was a nation that was hauled out of slavery. And now he tells a story. If we're going to understand this story, if we're going to understand how to move from a place of being in tension to being in a place where we pursue the things of God, an identity as pursuers of God, an identity of children of God, we have to understand what Peter's about to say. And so let's wind all the way back. You see, this reference to the sinless, spotless Lamb of God is a reference to Jesus. But it's also a reference to what God did in Exodus chapter 12. So in the Old Testament, which is everything before Jesus, We have Genesis, which is all about the formation of the people of Israel out of a guy named Abraham. And it builds this nation, but they don't really have any national identity. They're just kind of like there's lots of people. They end up in slavery in Egypt. And this is the book of Exodus, the second book in the Bible. The nation of Israel is now enslaved for 400 years in Egypt. Leviticus and onwards, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, is about the formation of that nation after their slavery. But in Exodus chapter 12, we find our place in the scriptures where God is trying to break the grip of slavery on the nation of Israel. And as he's trying to break this grip, he sends Moses to plead with a guy named Pharaoh, the leader of Egypt. And he's pleading with him to say, I want you to let my people go. I want you to set them free. Stop oppressing them. Stop abusing them. I want you to let these people free. See, God's concern is always for justice. And as he's lobbying for this freedom, he sends a sequence of persuasive plagues to try and convince and say, I'm serious. I'm not playing games. Hashtag no games. And none of them work. And in Exodus 12, we find ourselves at the final plague. And God says, look, I've been trying to get your attention and you're not listening. Your hearts are hard. You're not letting my people go, so I'm going to send a final plague. And when this happens, all your firstborn children are going to die. Sons. But if you're willing to trust me, you can take the blood of a lamb and you can put it on the doorpost as a way of saying, we surrender to you, God. We trust you rather than our own hard hearts. You see, God in his grace, he is patient, and he was patient for 400 years. If you don't know if God's patient, God's very patient. But he's tired of the oppression. He's trying to set his people free. And so they take this lamb. And what this lamb does is this lamb is a symbol of the purchase of freedom from slavery. And so what happens is that the plague comes and the people are set free after this horrific situation. But the Israelites are saved as they surrender to God by the blood of this lamb. It's a symbol. In the same way, Peter is saying Jesus has purchased our freedom from slavery. You see, this is not just Peter saying, hey, I want you to be better. You need to stop being and doing sinful things. What he's saying is, you were once enslaved. You were stuck as a people. And yet God in his grace has sent Jesus to purchase your freedom. In fact, he so longed for your freedom. He was so serious about your freedom that he actually gave his life for you. Now, here's the thing. Many of you are sitting there going, I'm not a slave. That's true. You're not a slave. We don't have slavery in Canada. But Paul, the Apostle Paul, says something very profound in Romans chapter 6. He says, you are a slave to whatever you choose to obey. You are a slave to whatever you choose to obey. The reality is that you, wherever you're sitting, at one point in your life, you have been enslaved to a pattern of thinking. Many of us are enslaved to a longing and a deep desire to be affirmed and congratulated by others. Others of us are enslaved to an addiction, to a substance, or a product. Others of you are enslaved to the idea of career and success. And what we do is we take these things, some of which might actually be okay things, and we say, all of my hope is in that thing. All of my joy is in that thing. And we put all of our energy, all of our passion, all of our longing into that, and we're wondering why it doesn't satisfy. The reality is that when we put our energy and in our efforts into anything other than Jesus, we are going to live lives that are less than satisfied. Because the reality is that no human thing can satisfy the longings of the human soul. You were not created to satisfy yourself. You were created to be satisfied in God. And so Peter says, look, there were these people that were slaves, and yet their freedom was purchased with the blood of the Lamb. And in the same way, we find ourselves enslaved to a pattern of living, and yet we've been set free by the work of Jesus. Now, the radical thing, and this is mind-blowing, is that the slaves left Egypt, about 1 million of them. Wandered out of Egypt, and they ended up in the desert. They ended up in the season between slavery and the promised land. Probably the season you find yourself in. You're looking at the promises of God in the distance and you're saying, I want to be here. I want to be in the promises. You're no longer over here in the land of slavery. You're somewhere in the middle. You find yourself in the middle of the wilderness. And you know what the slaves did in that wilderness? They stopped looking at what God's promises were. And they started looking back. And said, you know what, I'm actually going to find some satisfaction. It would be better if we were back here. It would be better if we were back here. They took their eyes off the promises of Jesus. They took their eyes off the promises of God and instead longed for the quick fix. And some of you have come to Jesus in those moments. And you've had that moment with God where you said, I'm all in. I'm willing to give you everything, Jesus. I'm willing to go all in to love you and serve you and chase after you. But now maybe a year, 3, 5 years in, you're going, I'm tired. I'm in the wilderness. I'm no longer stuck in slavery, but I certainly haven't encountered the freedom that I seem to be called to. And what Peter is saying in this moment, he's saying, press in. Continue to pursue the things of God. You see, your life was not purchased by the blood of a mere lamb. Your life was purchased by the blood of Jesus. And so what we do is we find ourselves in these situations where we're going, maybe it's okay. Maybe I'll be satisfied if I just start partying again. Head back clubbing. I know that I left that life, but man, it's so attractive. Your freedom, hear me. Your freedom was not purchased with something cheap. It was purchased with something significant. And what we do is we lose that moment. We lose that focus. We lose that attention where we recognize the cost of our freedom. To be a Jesus follower. To be somebody that is pursuing Jesus is not a cheap thing. It is something that cost Jesus his life. Should we wrap up in a moment? We'll get the band up. You need to hear me tonight, church. Jesus didn't die so that we could live somewhere in the middle. He didn't die so that we can live 1 foot over here in the world, desiring the things of the world, hedging our bets, and 1 foot in the things of Jesus. The only option we have is to be both feet in on Jesus. And you see, what we do is we go, well, God's grace, Robin, you're preaching, you're telling me I just got to behave right. I'm not saying you have to behave right. I'm saying you have to desire right. Desire the things of Jesus above all else. This is not a question of salvation. Salvation is provided in you by Jesus. Jesus died so that you could be set free. And that is a free gift for you. But what we do is we live like this. We live split. We live divided. We live torn. And the invitation is to be a people that are both feet all in on Jesus. And some of you, what we do is we go, well, all I feel is guilt and shame. Rather than being defined by a person, whose radical pursuit is Jesus. You're a person who's defined by your guilt or by your shame, by the things that you have done. And the promise of Jesus is, say, I came that you would have life and life to the full. That we wouldn't live torn between worlds. We wouldn't live, continue to step forward and step back, but just to live one step in front of another, pursuing the things of Jesus. I want to call some of you tonight to make a decision. To make a decision and stop being 2 feet in. To stop living and saying, well, I'm going to hope that the things of the world satisfy, and you're wondering why the things of Jesus aren't satisfying. It's because your eyes are fixed on the world. And I want to challenge you tonight, if that's you, to make a decision tonight. To say, I am in on Jesus. I'm going to stop hedging my bets. I'm going to stop waiting for something better. I'm going to stop hoping it gets better. But instead, I'm just going to say, I am after you, Jesus. Verse 21, it says, and you have placed your faith and your hope in God because he raised Christ from the dead and gave him great glory. This is not a commentary on eternity. This is a commentary on today. Is your faith, is your hope, is the way you're making decisions grounded in Jesus, framed by Jesus, informed by Jesus, in the pursuit of Jesus? Can we bow our heads tonight? If that's you tonight, and as I'm saying, I want to challenge you to make a decision for Jesus. If you've said before that Jesus is Lord, if you've put your hand up and you've said, I'm a Jesus follower, but you've been living divided, you've been living 1 foot in, 1 foot out, I want to challenge you tonight to make a decision, to put both feet in on Jesus, to stop hedging your bets, to stop hoping that the things of the world satisfy, but to say, I'm all in on you, Jesus. If that's you, why don't you raise your hand tonight? Yeah, come on. Yeah, it's good. All over this place. Yeah, once it's up, you can put it down. Jesus, I pray for these ones that are willing to surrender tonight. I pray, Jesus, that as they surrender, God, that you would give them an assurance, a confidence, a hope, a joy in you. God, that when tomorrow they wake up and the trial comes, they wouldn't look at it and be tempted, but they would set their hope, they would set their joy, they would set their lives on you, that they would pursue you. God, that they would find a hope and a life and a joy in you. God, that whatever that thing is that they've been looking at that's been sucking them in, God, I speak freedom tonight. I pray, Lord, that you would break the chains, that you would set people free right now in this place. Secondly, as I'm speaking, I'm saying I want to challenge you to make a decision. And you've never made a decision to follow Jesus. You've never actually said, Jesus, I'm all in. I'm going to follow you. If that's you tonight, if you're saying, I want to become a Jesus follower, I want to follow Jesus, I want to give him my life. If that's you, why don't you raise your hand tonight? Is anyone else tonight that says, yeah, I want to be a Jesus follower in this moment? Everything can change in a moment. Yeah, I see that hand in the middle. Is there anyone else tonight that says, I want to become a Jesus follower? Awesome. That's you, and you raise your hand. I want to pray with you really quick. But I want to encourage you to come up, and I'll be right here at the front. I want to pray with you at the end of service. Jesus, I pray for these people that have raised their hands, that say they want to become Jesus followers. I pray, Lord, that we would, God, that they would give their lives to you tonight, that they would surrender to you. If that's you, you can just pray a prayer. Jesus, I give my life to you. I no longer live for me, but I live for you. I ask you to forgive me, Jesus.